At exactly 6:47 in the morning on March 12, 1944, Corporal Thomas Sullivan crouched in a muddy Italian ditch outside Casino, watching a German armored scout car roll toward his position at 15 miles per hour. He had no anti-tank weapons, no mines, no grenades, just a piece of rusted barbed wire wrapped around two shovel handles that every officer in the 34th Infantry Division had explicitly forbidden him from using. In the next 90 seconds, that improvised tripwire would either save an entire company or end Tommy's career in disgrace. The SD-KFZ 222 ground forward through morning fog thick as wet cotton. Tommy could hear its engine whining through the gears, could see the commander's hatch standing open, the German officer probably scanning for American positions everyone knew were here. The wire trembled in his hands, rusted steel singing a note only he could hear. One chance, that was all he had. One chance to prove that a railroad switchman from Gary, Indiana, understood cascade failures better than Army engineers. One chance to make Frank Riley's death mean something. One chance to keep a promise made to a dying friend in a muddy foxhole 3 weeks ago. The fog clung to the Leary Valley like something alive, cold and damp, smelling of cordite and turned earth and something else Tommy tried not to think about. Bodies decomposed differently in Italian soil than they did back in Indiana. He knew this now, knew it in ways that would never leave him. He pulled the wire taut and waited. But understanding how Tommy Sullivan reached this moment requires going back. Back to the place where steel rails stretched to horizons and coal smoke painted the sky orange at night. Back to the Gary Railroad yards. Back to the place where he learned that one loose pin could derail 6 cars and kill the men who trusted the system to keep them safe. Thomas Sullivan grew up in a world where failure cascaded and survival meant seeing problems before they became disasters. Gary, Indiana in the 1930s was a company town built on steel and broken backs. The Pennsylvania Railroad yards dominated the south side of town. U.S. Steel owned everything else that mattered. Men traded their bodies for paychecks that barely covered rent and food for families that grew faster than wages. His father worked the blast furnaces, 15-hour shifts in heat that could cook you from the inside out. The sound was constant, metal on metal, hammers and presses, and the roar of molten iron pouring into molds. The smell was particular, hot steel and coal smoke and machine oil and human sweat mixing into something that stung your eyes and coated your throat with grit that never quite washed away. The paycheck fed 6 kids but never covered everything. There was always something. Shoes that wore through, a roof that leaked every spring. Medical bills when Tommy's younger sister got scarlet fever and spent 2 weeks in a fever so high she saw things that weren't there. Tommy was the middle child, not the oldest who carried the weight of family expectations, not the youngest who got sympathy and extra portions at dinner, just middle, the invisible one. So he learned to make himself useful by paying attention to things other people missed, by seeing what needed doing before anyone asked, by being precise when precision mattered and keeping his mouth shut when it didn't. Summer of 1936, he was 12 years old and started spending afternoons at the railroad yards instead of playing baseball with other kids. Not because he was troubled or couldn't make friends, because the rail yards taught lessons no classroom could match. Practical lessons, survival lessons, the kind of knowledge that kept you breathing in a world designed to grind you down. The switchmen tolerated him. Old men mostly, weathered faces and scarred hands and eyes that had seen too many friends die because companies cut corners. They'd point things out sometimes when they weren't too busy. Which train cars carried what freight? Which couplings failed most often? Which rails showed stress fractures before they broke completely? You could hear the difference if you paid attention. A solid clang when cars coupled properly. A dull thunk when something was wrong. The sound told you everything if you learned to listen. By 14, Tommy could spot problems the paid inspectors missed. Not because he was smarter, because he watched patterns, understood systems, saw how one failure led to another in predictable cascades that could be prevented if anyone bothered to look. Summer of 1938 changed everything. Tommy was sitting on a flat car eating lunch when it happened. Sandwich and apple his mother had packed that morning. Watching a freight train coupled together. Standard procedure, routine work. The brakeman was Patrick Sullivan. No relation, but they joked about sharing a name. Patrick was 42 years old, had worked the yard since he was 16. Careful man, professional, the kind of worker who checked everything twice because he understood what happened when you didn't. Patrick was inspecting a coupling pin between two coal cars. The pin looked worn to Tommy from 30 yards away. He could see it in the way the metal caught the light. Stress discoloration. Hairline fractures forming. Patrick saw it too. Mentioned it to his supervisor. Pointed at the wear pattern with one scarred hand. The supervisor barely looked. It'll hold another month. We got quotas to meet. Can't be replacing every pin that looks a little worn. Patrick opened his mouth, then closed it, nodded, stepped back. Orders were orders. 2 days later, the pin failed. Tommy heard it before he saw it. Metal screaming, that particular sound of things breaking under load. He looked up from the rail he'd been cleaning and watched physics take over. One moment, the freight train was rolling smooth. The next, the coupling gave way, and 6 coal cars began derailing in a cascade of destruction that took 90 seconds and caused damage measured in tens of thousands of dollars and one human life. Patrick Sullivan got caught between 2 cars when they jackknifed. The coupling he'd questioned 48 hours earlier gave way, and 300 tons of steel and coal slammed together with him in between. Tommy watched them try to save him. Watched them fail. Patrick was conscious for the first hour, screaming. Then the screaming stopped and he went quiet. Shock setting in. Mercy of a kind. It took 3 more hours to cut through twisted metal with acetylene torches while Patrick's wife stood at the chain link fence with her hands pressed against the wire and her face showing nothing at all. Patrick died before they got him out. Crushed pelvis. Internal bleeding. Massive trauma. The company doctor said he probably didn't feel much after the first few minutes. The company doctor lied. The railroad ruled it operator error, said Patrick should have checked the coupling more carefully. Never mind that he'd reported the worn pin 2 days earlier. Never mind that maintenance logs showed repeated requests for replacement that management had ignored for 6 weeks. Never mind that spending $4 on a new pin would have saved Patrick Sullivan's life and $60,000 in damage. The system protected itself. Always did. Tommy's father found him that evening behind the equipment shed. Tommy had his knees pulled up to his chest. Not crying, just sitting, staring at the twisted wreckage they hadn't cleared yet. Watching the sunset paint it gold like something beautiful instead of something that had killed a good man. His father sat down beside him. Didn't say anything for a long time. They watched darkness come to the rail yards. Watched the work lights flicker on. Watched men moving like ghosts through the wreckage trying to clear the tracks before morning. Finally, his father spoke. His voice was rough from coal dust and cigarettes and 30 years of breathing air no human lungs were designed to process. You see what happened today? Tommy nodded. 1 loose pin, 1 failure, 6 cars destroyed, 1 man dead. That's how systems work, boy. 1 thing breaks and everything breaks. You learn to spot the problems before they cascade into disasters. His father pulled a cigarette from his shirt pocket. Lit it with shaking hands. The flame showed his face. Older than his years. Worn down. The company says it was Patrick's fault. Says he should have been more careful. But you and I both saw him report that pin. Saw the supervisor dismiss it. Patrick died because the company didn't want to spend $4 and delay a shipment by 30 minutes. His father looked at Tommy in the growing darkness. You remember this. Rules protect the system, not the people in it. Sometimes following orders gets good men killed. You gotta be smart enough to know when the rules are wrong, smart enough to do what's right even when it's not approved. Tommy never forgot. By 16, he was working the yards full-time. Apprentice switchman under old Frank Murphy. 62 years old with 40 years on the rails. Hands scarred from 1,000 small injuries. Voice like gravel in a bucket, but sharp, still seeing things younger men missed. Murphy taught him to think in systems, to understand that failures multiplied, that 1 problem led to 10 if you didn't catch it early. You see that coupler, Murphy would say, pointing with a hand missing 2 fingers from an accident in the 11. Looks fine to most people, but see that hairline crack 6 months, maybe 8 that fails under load. Then we got another Patrick Sullivan situation. You learn to see the problems before they see you. The work taught Tommy something schools never could: how to read stress patterns in metal by sight, how to judge when something would fail by feel more than measurement, how to understand that every system was only as strong as its weakest link, and someone had to care enough to find those weak links before they killed people. Frank Riley lived 3 houses down from Tommy. Same street, same neighborhood, same world of struggle and small victories. They'd been friends since they were 8 years old. Inseparable. Brothers in everything but blood. Frank's father was a railroad brakeman. Good man. Hard worker. Provided for his family the best he could with wages that never quite stretched far enough. But being careful and working hard didn't always matter when the equipment was old and maintenance was deferred and companies valued quarterly profits over human safety. The same year Patrick Sullivan died, Frank Riley's father died too, September 1938. Different accident, same root cause: coupling failure, company negligence. Frank was 15, Tommy was 14. They stood together at the funeral in a cemetery where the headstones were too close together and the grass never grew right because the soil was full of coal dust from the mills. Watch Frank's father lowered into ground that didn't want him. Frank's mother tried to hold 5 kids together on a widow's pension that paid $30 a month. Not enough. Never enough. The company gave her nothing beyond the pension. Said it was operator error. Said Frank's father should have inspected the equipment more thoroughly. Never mind the maintenance logs. Never mind the documented requests for repairs that had been denied for budget reasons. The company had lawyers and procedures and ways of protecting itself from liability. Tommy was 16 then. Old enough to understand how the system worked. Old enough to be angry. Old enough to decide that anger without action was just noise. He spent 3 weeks building a case, documented every instance where management had been warned about failing equipment, every maintenance request denied, every inspection report showing dangerous wear that nobody addressed. Found 8 separate incidents in 6 months where Frank's father had reported problems and been told to keep working. Tommy took it to a lawyer. Young guy fresh out of Notre Dame Law School. Still believed the system could work if you pushed hard enough. The lawyer took one look at the documentation and knew he had something. He took it to his bosses at the firm. They wanted it buried. Bad for business. But the young lawyer threatened to take it to newspapers, to unions, to anyone who would listen. Made enough noise that the company lawyers decided settling was cheaper than fighting. The railroad gave Frank's family $2,000, enough for 6 months of rent and food. Enough to bury Frank's father in a plot that wasn't in the pauper section. Not enough to replace a husband and father. Not enough to make things right, but something. Frank never forgot what Tommy did. Neither did Tommy. It taught him that sometimes the system could be forced to work if you gathered enough evidence and made enough noise. But it also taught him that the system would always try to protect itself first and people second. Summer of 1942. Both 18 now, both working full-time as switchmen, both understanding that they'd probably spend their whole lives in these rail yards unless they found a way out. They were sitting on a flat car during lunch break. Sandwiches and coffee gone cold in thermoses. Looking out over the yards where their fathers had broken their bodies for wages that barely kept families fed. Frank had been quiet all morning, not his usual self. Finally he spoke. "We're going to open our own shop someday." Tommy looked at him. "What kind of shop?" "Rail services, Sullivan and Riley Rail Services. We'll do the safety work, coupling repairs, inspections, the stuff that actually matters. Keep people alive instead of just keeping trains running on time." Frank was animated now, the way he got when he believed in something. "We specialize in the work companies skip because it costs money. Make sure no more kids have to watch their fathers die because someone didn't want to spend $4 on a new pin. Do it right. Do it safe. Build a reputation for never cutting corners." Tommy felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe, or purpose. Something beyond the endless grind of switching cars and watching the years disappear into coal smoke and wage slavery. "Sullivan and Riley," Tommy said, "has a good sound to it." They shook hands. A promise between friends, a dream to work toward, something better than what their fathers had. December 1942, the draft notices arrived on the same day, delivered by the same postal carrier. Expected, inevitable. The war needed bodies, and Gary, Indiana had plenty of young men who knew how to work with their hands. They enlisted together, same recruiting office, same oath, same stupid grin, thinking they were doing something noble, something that mattered more than switching railroad cars. Fort Benjamin Harrison first, then Camp Croft, South Carolina. Basic training, 8 weeks of men screaming in your face about discipline and following orders and becoming part of something larger than yourself. Then North Africa, then Sicily, then mainland Italy. Frank kept talking about the shop, drew plans on cigarette packs, sketched layouts in the dirt with sticks when they had downtime, calculated costs, dreamed out loud about equipment and location and how they'd build something that honored their fathers by protecting other fathers. First thing after the war, Frank would say, we open it together, equal partners, do it right. One night in November 1943, they were on watch together outside Salerno, 2 in the morning, cold, fog rolling in from the Mediterranean, thick enough to taste salt. Tommy had been thinking about the German scout cars they'd seen that afternoon, fast, armored, killing Americans with impunity because nobody had weapons that worked against them. I've been thinking about those scout cars, Tommy said. Frank was cleaning his rifle, methodical, thorough. Yeah, they use the same roads, predictable patterns, and they've got one vulnerability nobody's exploiting. What's that? Wheels, they're light vehicles. Wire stretched across a road at axle height. Car hits it at speed, axle locks momentum, flips it. Like a coupling failure. Cascade effect. Frank looked at him. Understanding dawning. Physics. Simple physics. Wire and shovels, equipment we already have. No special weapons needed. Frank smiled. Save that idea for after the war. We'll patent it for the rail shop. Teach companies how to stop runaway cars. Make a fortune. They both laughed, neither knowing Frank had 10 weeks to live. February 18th, 1944. Dawn patrol outside casino. The fog was thick that morning, cold and damp and clinging to everything like wet cotton that wouldn't let go. Tommy and Frank were in adjacent foxholes, 40 yards from a dirt road the Germans used for reconnaissance. Standard defensive position. Rifles ready, grenades within reach. Watching for movement through fog that made visibility 20 yards at best. 6:15 in the morning, Tommy heard it. That distinctive whine of a German straight 6-engine, getting closer, coming fast. The SD KFZ 222 emerged from fog like something from a nightmare. Gray paint, commander standing in open hatch with binoculars, scanning, professional, experienced, moving maybe 20 miles per hour. Frank saw it at the same instant. Scout car. Tommy found it through his sights. I see it. The vehicle kept coming. 150 yards, 100. The 20mm autocannon was traversing slowly, looking for targets. The MG-34 gunner was alert, ready. These weren't recruits. These were professionals who'd been doing this for months and survived because they were good. Frank lifted his M1 Garand. His voice was calm, steady. I can hit it. With what rifle rounds won't touch that armor? Gotta try something. Can't let it spot us and call artillery. Tommy wanted to stop him, wanted to remind him about the wire idea, about how this was exactly the situation they'd discussed. But there wasn't time. The scout car was there. Real, immediate, moving. And doctrine said, engage reconnaissance vehicles. Frank fired, 3 shots, fast, professional. The rounds hit armor and sparked bright in the morning fog, sound like hammers on an anvil. The scout car didn't even slow. The MG-34 traversed, found Frank's muzzle flash. The gunner was good, fast, professional. 3 rounds, chest, high chest, just below the collarbone. Tommy was already moving. Didn't think, didn't calculate risk, just ran. Boots pounding mud, heart hammering, world narrowing to one objective. Get to Frank. He dropped into Frank's foxhole and pulled him close. The blood was everywhere, hot, dark, soaking through both uniforms. 3 entry wounds, exit wounds in Frank's back the size of fists. Frank's eyes were wide, confused, like his brain couldn't process what his body was telling him. Tommy, voice wet, bubbling, blood in his lungs, can't breathe right. What happened? You're hit. Medic's coming. Hold on. Tommy pressed down on wounds, felt blood pulsing between his fingers. Warm, slick, unstoppable. Frank's life draining away and nothing Tommy could do to stop it. The scout car. Frank coughed. More blood, darker. I fired. Thought I could stop it. Don't talk. Save your strength. Frank gripped Tommy's arm, strength already fading. The wire, you said wire would work against the wheels. You were right. Frank, please. Should have tried it, should have broken the rules. Frank's eyes found Tommy's, clear for just a moment, focused. Promise me, no more waiting for permission. No more following orders that kill your brothers. I promise. The shop, Sullivan and Riley, you gotta open it. Promise me. We'll open it together. You're gonna be fine. Frank smiled, bloody teeth. Liar, you always were a bad liar. His voice was getting weaker, fading like smoke. Tell my ma. Tell her the shop was real. In my head it was real. Tell her I tried. Tommy felt it. The exact moment. When Frank stopped being there. When his eyes went from seeing to staring. When the grip on Tommy's arm went from pressure to weight. 6:23 in the morning. 4 minutes and 38 seconds after the MG-34 fired. Tommy sat in that foxhole holding Frank Riley's body for 9 minutes. The war continued around him. Men shouting, radio chatter, officers yelling about maintaining positions. The scout car's engine fading into fog. None of it mattered. The world had ended and nobody else noticed. When Tommy finally stood, he looked at the road where the scout car had disappeared. Untouched. Unstoppable. Free to operate because American doctrine said soldiers weren't allowed to use methods that actually worked. Frank had died because Tommy had a solution, but didn't act. Didn't have courage to break rules. Waited for permission that never came. Something crystallized inside Tommy's chest. Something hard and sharp and unforgiving. Never again. 5 days later, Sergeant Mike Brennan died. Brooklyn, 24, 4 sisters, another scout car, another autocannon. His mother got the telegram, March 2nd. March 4th, Corporal Luis Vargas died. El Paso, 22, always shared his last cigarette. The 222 drove through at dusk, machine gun blazing, Vargas running for cover. The autocannon caught him. By early March, 47 men dead in 6 weeks, not battles, not heroic stands, just scout cars killing Americans who had no answer. March 5th, Captain Hayes called a meeting. 20 soldiers in a barn. Hayes arrived from headquarters. Clean uniform, shined boots, like he'd never held a dying friend. Higher command is aware of the reconnaissance problem. New bazooka shipments expected within the month. Until then, maintain discipline and follow engagement protocols. Tommy stood in back, raised his hand. Sir? Hayes looked annoyed. What is it, Corporal? What if we rigged wire across roads low height? Catch the axles. Car hits at speed flips. Simple physics, like a coupling failure. One component fails, whole system cascades. Silence. Men nodding, seeing it. Hayes looked at him like he'd suggested treason. Corporal Sullivan, the field manual is very clear. Wire entanglements require engineering oversight. They are not improvised booby traps. But sir, we have wire and shovels. The math is simple. 14-inch height. The 222 won't see it until too late. The answer is no. We will not set random tripwires that could injure our own men. We will wait for proper equipment. Is that clear? Yes, sir. But Tommy didn't forget. Couldn't forget. Frank died telling him to stop waiting, March 10th afternoon. Privates Chen and Harrison died. Both good men, both killed by a scout car, nobody could stop. That night, Tommy made his decision. No more following orders that killed good men. No more waiting for permission. At midnight, he would build the tripwire that would save 400 lives. But first, he'd nearly lose everything when a German patrol came within 50 yards of discovering it. March 10th, 1944, midnight. Tommy Sullivan waited until the camp slept. The kind of deep sleep exhausted soldiers fell into after 16-hour days of watching for death. He grabbed a coil of barbed wire from the supply dump, 30 feet, rusted but strong, the kind they used for defensive positions. Then 2 entrenching tools. Standard issue folding shovels every soldier carried, and he moved out alone into darkness. No permission, no backup, no witnesses. The March night was cold. Mud sucked at his boots with every step. He could hear artillery rumbling to the north. Constant, distant, like thunder that never stopped. The kind of sound that became background noise after a while. The kind you only noticed when it went silent. The dirt road ran parallel to Allied lines about 400 yards out. Germans used it for reconnaissance. Americans used it for patrols. Everyone knew it was there. Predictable. Covered by trees on both sides. Perfect terrain for what Tommy had in mind. He found a spot where the road narrowed between two oak trees. Good visibility from the American side. Limited visibility from the German side until you were right on top of it. Exactly what he needed. The first shovel went into the ground on the left side of the road. Tommy angled it back toward American positions. Drove it in. The blade sank 6 inches into mud. Not deep enough. Not nearly deep enough to hold under the stress that was coming. He used a rock to hammer it deeper. Each strike sounded loud in the quiet. Too loud. But there was no other way. 12 inches. The shovel held firm when he tested it. Stable. The second shovel went in on the right side. Tommy paced it out, 18 feet across. The width had to be exact. Too narrow and the scout car could swerve around. Too wide and the wire wouldn't have enough tension. Then came the wire. He wrapped it around the first shovel's handle. 3 loops, tight as he could make it. His hands were slick with mud and rust. The wire bit into his palms, sharp, cutting through work gloves. He could feel blood mixing with cold and didn't care. Tommy stretched the wire across the road at exactly 14 inches off the ground. Not ankle height where it might catch a soldier on patrol. Not waist height where it would be visible. Axle height. He'd measured a destroyed 222 2 weeks ago during a patrol. Memorized the dimensions. Front axle sat 13 to 15 inches depending on load. The wire had to catch it at speed without breaking. Had to be strong enough to lock the axle but flexible enough not to snap on impact. The physics were simple, but the execution was everything. He wrapped the other end around the second shovel. 3 loops again. Then tested the tension by pulling hard. The wire hummed. Musical. A note that sang in the darkness. The shovels held. Too loose and the wire would snap on impact. Too tight and it would break before the axle caught. The balance had to be perfect. Tommy adjusted, tightened fractionally, tested again. The wire sang when he plucked it. That perfect tension. The sound of something ready to do its job. The whole setup took 23 minutes. He sat in the ditch afterward catching his breath, watching the road. If a patrol came now, he'd have to run. If an officer found out, court-martial. If it worked, maybe Frank Riley's death would mean something. He buried the wire under a thin layer of mud, not enough to weaken it, just enough to make it invisible in low light or fog. The shovels were already rusted and dirty, looked like abandoned equipment. Someone would have to be looking directly at them to notice. And by the time they did, it would be too late. Tommy crawled back to American lines at 1:15 in the morning. He didn't tell anyone. Couldn't tell anyone. Morrison had been clear. This was unauthorized. This violated doctrine. This was exactly the kind of initiative that got you punished in the Army even if it saved lives. He lay in his foxhole and waited for dawn. The wire was out there, taut and invisible, waiting, ready to prove that a railroad switchman understood physics better than the men who wrote the manuals. March 12, 1944, 6:43 in the morning. Tommy was on watch, eating cold rations from a tin, corned beef that tasted like salt and regret. The morning fog was thick, dense. You could barely see 50 yards. Then he heard it, that distinctive whine of a German straight 6-engine. SD KFZ 222, coming from the north at moderate speed. He didn't move, didn't call out. Nobody else had heard it yet. The sound was still distant, muffled by fog. But Tommy knew the engines, knew exactly what was coming. The scout car emerged from fog at 600 yards. Gray paint wet with condensation. Commander's hatch open. The officer was scanning with binoculars. Methodical, professional, looking for American positions to map and report. 500 yards. Tommy could see the commander clearly now. Young, maybe 25, blonde hair, Clean uniform. The kind of soldier who'd been doing this for months and survived because he was careful. The gunner was traversing the 20mm autocannon, probably out of boredom more than expectation of contact. This was routine for them. Drive the road, scan the positions, report back. Artillery would arrive 12 hours later and kill everyone the scout car had spotted. 400 yards. The vehicle stayed on the road. Perfect. Exactly what Tommy needed. If it veered off into the fields, the wire wouldn't matter. 300 yards. Tommy's hands were shaking. This either worked or it didn't. If it didn't, the scout car would find them and call artillery. If it did, he'd violated direct orders and there would be consequences. He didn't care. Chen and Harrison had died 2 days ago. Vargas, Brennan, Frank. The list was too long. 200 yards. The car accelerated slightly, probably wanting to clear the area quickly. Get back to German lines. Report what they'd seen. Call in the artillery that would kill Americans tonight. 100 yards. Tommy could see details now. Mud caked on the wheels, the spare tire mounted on the side, the MG-34 machine gun beside the autocannon. Every detail sharp and clear, like the world had slowed down. 50 yards from the wire. The front wheels were spinning fast, muddy, wet. The driver was good, keeping speed consistent. Not too fast to lose control, not too slow to be vulnerable. The wire caught the front right wheel at exactly 6:47 in the morning. The effect was immediate and violent. The wheel locked. The axle seized. But the car's momentum was too great. 15 miles per hour translated to 22 feet per second. 3,000 pounds of German armor with nowhere to go except forward and down. The locked wheel acted as a pivot point. Physics took over. The entire vehicle's weight shifted forward and sideways simultaneously. The nose went down first, digging into the road, spraying mud and gravel in a fountain. Then the rear lifted, gravity and momentum fighting each other. The commander had maybe half a second to realize what was happening. His mouth opened. No sound came out, just shock. The car went vertical. It rolled once. The commander was thrown clear during the first rotation. His body arced through air. 30 feet, landed in a muddy ditch with a sound Tommy would never forget. Wet, final. The car rolled twice, metal screaming, glass shattering, the autocannon tearing loose from its mount, ammunition cooking off inside. Small pops, not explosions, just rounds igniting from impact and friction. It rolled 3 times, each rotation slower. Momentum bleeding away, physics reaching its conclusion. The vehicle stopped upside down, wheels spinning uselessly in the air, engine still running, smoke pouring from the crushed compartment, the smell of gasoline and hot metal and something burning. Tommy was already moving. He grabbed his M1 Garand and ran toward the wreck, yelling for covering fire, his voice raw, loud, breaking the morning silence. Other soldiers poured out of positions, rifles up, scanning for threats, converging on the overturned scout car. The commander was dead. Tommy could see that from 20 feet away, neck broken during the second roll, body bent at angles that weren't impossible if you were still alive. The gunner was trapped under the turret, unconscious, blood coming from his ears, probably concussion, maybe worse, breathing shallow and fast. The driver was crawling out through the windscreen, dazed, maybe 22 years old, blonde hair matted with blood. He looked up at Tommy and raised his hands. Surrender. No fight left, just shock and confusion and the understanding that he'd survived something he shouldn't have. Tommy pulled him clear, handed him to Private Danny Foster, Gary's Southside kid, known Tommy since they were 8. Danny took the German prisoner without questions. Then Tommy saw the wire, still attached to the front axle, still wrapped around the rusted shovel handles. The shovels had been pulled from the ground and dragged 20 feet, but the wire had held. The tension had been perfect. The physics had worked exactly as calculated. Tommy unwrapped it fast, hands moving on instinct, coiled the wire, shoved it in his pack before anyone could see clearly what had stopped the car. The shovels looked like abandoned equipment. Wire looked like salvage. Nobody knew what really happened. Captain Hayes arrived 6 minutes later. He looked at the overturned scout car, then at Tommy. His eyes were sharp, calculating, suspicious. "What happened, Corporal?" It flipped, sir. Must have hit something in the road. Hayes walked around the wreck slowly, looking for evidence. Mines, bazooka damage, rocket strikes, something that made sense according to approved doctrine. Something he could put in a report and explain to higher command. He found nothing. The car was intact except for roll damage. No penetrations, no blast marks, no burned paint from explosives. Just one very destroyed scout car that had simply flipped for no apparent reason that fit official explanations. Hayes stopped walking, looked at the ground, at tire marks, at the road surface. He was smart, West Point educated, trained to analyze battlefield evidence and draw conclusions. Corporal Sullivan, scout cars don't just flip themselves. Yes, sir. Hayes stared at him, really stared, like he could see through words to truth underneath. He knew something was wrong, couldn't figure out what, couldn't prove anything. But he knew the German prisoner was secured, the car would be documented. Nobody was dead on the American side. Hayes could push this, could investigate, could make it a problem, could probably figure it out if he tried hard enough. But he didn't. Get this vehicle documented. I want photographs and a full report by 1600 hours. Yes, sir. Hayes walked away, but Tommy saw him glance back, saw the wheels turning, saw suspicion that would either fade or grow, depending on what happened next. By noon, every soldier in the company knew something was wrong with the official story. Scout cars didn't flip themselves. Physics didn't work that way. But Tommy wasn't talking, and nobody else had seen the installation. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Private Danny Foster found Tommy cleaning his rifle. What really happened out there? Tommy didn't look up. Car flipped. Tommy, I saw wire in your pack, saw the shovels. I know you. Tommy stopped cleaning, looked at Danny, long moment of calculation. They'd known each other since elementary school. Same neighborhood, same streets, same world. If anyone would understand, it was Danny. You didn't see anything. Danny sat down, spoke quietly. If I did see something, hypothetically, would it work again? Yes. Can you teach me? That night after dark, Tommy showed Danny everything. Different road section, 300 yards north of the first location. How to drive the shovels, how to wrap wire, how to calculate exact height, how to test tension, how to bury the wire, how to remove evidence before anyone investigated. Danny did it himself while Tommy watched. Made mistakes, corrected them, learned fast the way people do when lives depend on it. Don't tell anyone unless you trust them completely, Tommy said. This spreads wrong, we all hang. Danny nodded. I know someone who needs to know. Lost his brother to a scout car last week. Your call, your risk. Make damn sure. Within 48 hours, 6 soldiers knew. Tommy hadn't told 5 of them. Danny told Private Jackson. Jackson told Private O'Malley. O'Malley told Corporal Williams. Word spread through the underground network that exists in every military unit. The whispered conversations after officers go to sleep. The informal chain of trust connecting men who do actual fighting. By March 15th, installations were going up. Jackson rigged one on the road to San Pietro. O'Malley set one near the Garigliano River. Williams put one across a trail Germans used for night patrols. None had permission. None were documented. They just did it. March 18th, the second 222 hit Jackson's wire. Same result. Car flipped, commander killed, crew injured. Jackson was smart enough to remove the wire before investigators arrived. Told the same story. Must have hit something in the road. March 21st, third car hit O'Malley's trap. Didn't flip completely, but crashed hard enough to disable the vehicle. Crew abandoned it burning. O'Malley removed the wire and disappeared before questions could start. By March 25th, German reconnaissance in the 34th Division sector had dropped 60%. The 222s were still probing, but slower, taking different routes. Showing more caution, something had changed and they didn't know what. But March 16th almost ended everything. 5:47 in the morning, Tommy was installing his 4th wire. Different location, road junction near the Rapido River. Good position, high traffic. Germans used it regularly. The setup was almost complete. Wire stretched. Tension perfect. Just needed to bury it and disappear before dawn made him visible. Then voices. German. Close. Getting closer. Infantry patrol. Tommy could hear boots. 8 men, maybe 10, moving down the road from the north, directly toward his position. He froze. Wire stretched across the road but not buried. Shovels visible on both sides. If the patrol saw this, they'd understand immediately. Would scan every road for tripwires. Would warn every reconnaissance unit. The method would die before it could spread. And there was another problem. Scout car approaching from the south. Tommy could hear the engine. Faint, distant, but getting closer, due to arrive in maybe 10 minutes based on their usual schedule. German infantry 50 yards north and closing. Scout car approaching from south. Wire stretched across the junction, waiting to flip a vehicle while enemy soldiers watched. Tommy had maybe 90 seconds to decide. Remove the wire and abort. Leave it and pray the timing worked. Run and abandon everything. He chose to stay. Dropped into the ditch. Buried the wire hastily. Hands moving fast. Too fast. Not as careful as it should be. The shovels were visible but looked abandoned. Old. Rusted. Could be battlefield debris. The German patrol reached the junction at 5:58. Stopped. Sat down. Took a break. Smoking. Talking. Laughing about something. One corporal sat down maybe 10 feet from the south shovel. Didn't notice it. 6:01 in the morning. The scout car sound got louder. Closer, maybe 200 yards out now. Germans still sitting. Comfortable. Taking their time. The sergeant was checking a map, pointing at something, explaining routes or positions or something that took precious minutes. 6:03. Scout car very close now, 100 yards. Tommy could hear it clearly. The engine note rising and falling as it navigated terrain. German sergeant stood up, looked at his watch, said something. The others groaned, stood slowly, gathering equipment, taking their time because they didn't know death was 90 seconds away. 6:04. Scout car 60 yards south. Germans forming up to continue patrol. Moving north, starting to walk. 6:05. Germans 30 yards north of junction. Walking away. Scout car 40 yards south. Both moving toward the wire. Tommy's heart was hammering so hard he could hear it, feel it, taste it. If the car hit wire now, Germans would hear it, would turn back, would investigate, would find the shovels and understand. 6:06. Germans rounded a bend, disappeared from view. Maybe 60 yards away now, close enough to hear, too far to see through fog. 6:07. Scout car reached the junction, hit the wire. The flip was violent, loud, metal screaming, glass shattering. 3 complete rolls. Stopped upside down with wheels spinning and smoke pouring from engine. Germans shouted. Turned back, running toward the sound. Boots pounding, orders being yelled. Tommy had maybe 90 seconds, maybe less. He ran to the wreck, low, fast, unwrapped wire from the axle, fingers moving on muscle memory, coiled it, shoved it in his pack. German voices getting louder, closer, 40 yards, 35. Grabbed the south shovel, yanked it from ground, came free easy, mud releasing it, 25 yards. He could hear individual voices now. Orders, confusion, north shovel stuck, mud holding it. Tommy pulled, nothing. Pulled harder. The shovel wouldn't budge. 20 yards. Germans almost at the junction. Tommy abandoned the shovel, dove into the ditch, crawled fast. Mud and water soaking through his uniform. Cold. Dark. Moving by feel more than sight. Germans arrived. 10 of them. Surrounding the wreck. Pulling injured crew out. Shouting for medic. Trying to understand what happened. One corporal spotted the north shovel. Picked it up. Looked at it. Confused. Why is American shovel here? He turned it over in his hands, examining it, trying to make sense of it. Then American artillery started falling, counter-battery fire. Someone had spotted the German patrol and called it in. Shells landing close, bracketing the junction. Germans scattered, dropped the shovel, ran for cover, abandoning the wreck, saving themselves. Tommy waited until the barrage lifted, crawled back during the smoke, retrieved the north shovel, crawled to American lines through mud and cordite smoke and the smell of high explosives. Closest call he would ever have. Lieutenant Werner Steiner commanded a scout platoon in the 29th Panzergrenadier Division. 29 years old, 3 SD KFZ 222s under his command, running patrols in the Casino sector since January. Experienced, professional, knew the terrain better than most Germans, better than some Italians. The past 2 weeks had been catastrophic. March 12th, Vehicle 237 flipped on a road his unit had used 50 times without incident. Commander dead. No mine, no bazooka, no visible cause. March 18th, Vehicle 241 flipped. Same pattern, same inexplicable result. Commander killed in the rollover. March 21st, Vehicle 244 crashed badly, disabled. Crew escaped, but the car was total loss. 3 vehicles in 10 days. More losses than he'd sustained in the previous 4 months combined. March 27th, Steiner examined the wreckage of Vehicle 237 personally. He was an engineer before the war, understood stress and failure, could read evidence most officers missed. The front axle was bent but intact, no explosive damage, no mine crater, but there were scrapes on the wheel housing, deep gouges. Something had caught the axle at high speed, something thin and strong. He found a fragment embedded in the wheel well. Barbed wire, rusted, standard issue. Could be German or American. But the placement was deliberate. Someone had strung it across the road at exactly the right height to catch a light armored car's front axle. March 29th, Steiner reported his findings to Division Intelligence. The officer was skeptical, dismissive even. Barbed wire wouldn't stop a light armored car, Lieutenant. The weight and momentum are too great. I have wire fragments. I have scrape patterns consistent with axle entanglement. I have 3 destroyed vehicles and no other explanation. Americans don't have the engineering capability for this kind of precision. Their doctrine doesn't include improvised anti-vehicle obstacles. You're probably looking at mechanical failures, bad maintenance. War puts stress on equipment. Steiner wanted to argue, wanted to insist. But arguing with superior officers rarely accomplished anything productive. With respect, sir, 3 mechanical failures in 10 days on vehicles that were serviced regularly seems unlikely. Unlikely things happen in war, Lieutenant. File your report. We'll note it, but don't expect command to take action based on speculation about wire. The report was filed, noted, ignored. But Steiner wasn't stupid. He issued standing orders to his remaining reconnaissance units anyway. Scan roads for wire obstacles before proceeding at speed. Move at half speed through suspicious terrain. Commanders should dismount and inspect anything that looked irregular. The cautious approach cut their effectiveness by 40%. Reconnaissance missions that used to take 2 hours now took 4. Areas that used to be scanned daily were scanned every other day. Intelligence gathering had slowed to a crawl, but his men stopped dying in unexplained rollovers. The effect rippled through German operations. Patrols became less frequent, less aggressive. Artillery strikes called in by reconnaissance dropped by half because reconnaissance was seeing half as much. American casualties from scout car attacks essentially stopped. Americans didn't know why Germans had suddenly become careful. But they noticed, they appreciated it, and the tripwires kept spreading through units that whispered and learned and installed wire on roads where scout cars used to kill with impunity. By early April, the cascade was complete. One innovation, one soldier, one promise to a dying friend, and the war had changed in ways no official report would ever document. April 3, 1944. Captain William Hayes was inspecting company defensive positions. Routine work, making sure soldiers were properly dug in, making sure fields of fire were clear, making sure everyone understood their sector of responsibility. He found Corporal Williams setting up wire across a logging road. The configuration was identical to what Tommy had used. 2 shovels, barbed wire stretched between them. Exact height, perfect tension. Williams froze when he saw the captain approaching. Hayes walked over slowly, not rushing, not calling out, just walking like a man who had all the time in the world and intended to use it carefully. He tested the wire tension himself, felt the hum, the perfect tautness that sang when you pulled it, the kind of setup that couldn't be accidental. That required knowledge and practice and understanding of exactly what it was supposed to do. Where'd you learn this, Corporal? Williams said nothing, eyes forward, waiting for the hammer to fall. That's an order, Private. Corporal Sullivan, sir. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, processing, understanding dawning across his face. The flipped scout cars, the unexplained casualties, the sudden drop in German reconnaissance. All of it clicking into place like pieces of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for 3 weeks. He took out his notebook, started sketching the setup, measurements, angles, wire gauge, shovel placement, asked Williams to demonstrate the installation process step by step while he watched and took detailed notes. How many have you set up? 4, sir. Results: 1 hit, scout car flipped, German crew captured, no friendly casualties. Hayes closed his notebook, looked down the empty logging road. Artillery was rumbling somewhere to the north. Constant background noise. The war continuing, whether anyone paid attention or not. Here was a method that worked, required no special equipment. Ordinary soldiers could implement it in 20 minutes. Saved lives, stopped reconnaissance, changed the tactical situation in measurable ways. It also violated every regulation Hayes had been trained to enforce. Unauthorized weapon modification, improvised obstacles without engineering approval. Exactly the kind of unauthorized initiative that could get everyone involved court-martialed. Hayes had a choice: enforce regulations and stop something that was saving American lives, or ignore regulations and enable something that violated every rule he'd been taught mattered. He made his choice. Show me 2 more setups before dark. I want to see placement options for different terrain. Williams blinked, confused. Sir, that's an order, Corporal. I need to understand how this works in various tactical situations. Roads, trails, open ground. Show me the variations. Williams started to smile, caught himself. Yes, sir. Hayes spent the afternoon learning everything Williams knew: where to place shovels for maximum effect, how to calculate tension based on wire gauge, how to bury the wire so it was invisible but still functional, how to remove evidence before investigators arrived. He took notes on everything, on detailed technical documentation that would have made an engineer proud. Then he went back to his tent and started compiling a report. By April 10th, Hayes had documented 17 separate wire installations across the company sector. He'd interviewed the soldiers who set them up, recorded the results, calculated the success rate with the precision of a man who understood that numbers were harder to dismiss than anecdotes. 87% of scout cars hitting the wires were disabled. 0 friendly casualties from the installations. Total material cost was 30 feet of barbed wire and 2 shovels. Equipment already in the supply chain. No special requisitions needed. He wrote a 3-page report: technical specifications, tactical recommendations, statistical validation. The kind of documentation that couldn't be easily dismissed or ignored. April 12th, he submitted it to battalion. He knew this was risky, admitting he'd allowed unauthorized modifications. Admitting enlisted men had solved a problem that had stumped higher command. Admitting the field manual was wrong about something fundamental. But the statistics were undeniable. Lives saved were measurable. And Hayes had decided sometime in that logging road that being right mattered more than following regulations that got people killed. The response came back April 19th, short, direct, unambiguous. Method unauthorized, discontinue immediately, violates field manual regulations regarding obstacle emplacement, fails to meet engineering safety standards. All installations to be removed within 48 hours. Hayes read it twice. Then he filed it in his paperwork. Did nothing else. The tripwires stayed up. The casualty rate stayed down. Officially, nothing was happening. But unofficially, Hayes had decided that some orders deserved to be ignored. By late April, the statistics were impossible to dismiss. February 1944, before the tripwires existed. Deaths from reconnaissance vehicles, 47. Reconnaissance sightings in Division Sector 147. Artillery strikes called in by German scouts, 203. March 1944, as tripwires spread. Deaths, 12. 74% reduction. Sightings, 89. Artillery strikes, 127. April 1944, widespread use. Deaths, 3. 94% reduction. Sightings, 34. Artillery strikes 58. Someone in division staff noticed. Colonel Richard Anderson was the division intelligence officer, 52 years old, career Army, had been analyzing battlefield statistics since 1918, knew how to read patterns, knew when something significant was happening, even if official reports didn't explain it. Late April, he pulled the casualty reports for the entire division, saw the pattern immediately, sent investigators to the front lines with orders to find out what had changed. They found the tripwires within 2 days. April 28th, Anderson called Hayes to division headquarters. Hayes expected punishment. Court-martial maybe? Dishonorable discharge. End of career. Anderson sat behind a desk covered in reports and maps in the accumulated paperwork of running intelligence for 15,000 men. Captain Hayes, explain these unauthorized obstacles in your sector. Hayes stood at attention. Sir, I can explain the method or the results. Which matters more? Anderson looked at him. Really looked. Not with anger, with calculation. The kind of pragmatic assessment that came from 30 years of watching regulations collide with reality. Show me the statistics again. Hayes laid out everything. 17 documented installations, 87% success rate, 0 friendly casualties, negligible material cost. Could be taught in one evening to any soldier with basic understanding of physics. Anderson studied the numbers for a long time. Finally looked up. This violates doctrine. Yes, sir. It violates engineering protocols. Yes, sir. It was implemented without authorization from anyone in the chain of command. Yes, sir. Anderson leaned back in his chair. It also saved approximately 80 to 120 American lives in 6 weeks. Conservative estimate based on prevented artillery strikes. Hayes said nothing. Anderson made his decision. I can't officially approve a method that violates established doctrine, but I can't ignore results that save American lives. So here is what happens. Nothing. No orders to stop, no orders to continue, no official documentation beyond what's already filed. Memo that goes nowhere. Blind eye turned toward your sector and any other sector where this might be happening. He paused. I never saw anything. You never told me anything. Men stopped dying from scout car attacks. That's all either of us knows officially. Understood, sir. One more thing. The 36th Infantry Division is taking over this sector next month. They need to know how to deal with reconnaissance. Official anti-tank school takes 3 weeks and requires equipment we don't have. I need someone who can teach a faster method using available materials. Hayes understood immediately. Corporal Sullivan, sir. Is he reliable? He invented it, lost his best friend to a scout car, made a promise to a dying man. He's reliable. Then I want him on training detail. 2 weeks in June. Teach the method to scout and sniper teams from the 36th. We'll document it as improvised obstacle emplacement training. Nobody needs to know exactly what that means. Anderson was protecting the method by making it useful, spreading it through official channels without officially acknowledging what it was. Bureaucratic jujitsu, using the system against itself. May 23, 1944. Tommy was called to division headquarters. He reported in his cleanest uniform. It still looked like it had been through a war because it had. Anderson met him in a tent that smelled like canvas and coffee and cigarette smoke. Corporal Sullivan, I've read reports about your wire method. Tommy started to speak. Sir, I can explain. Anderson held up a hand. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to ask you to train others. Tommy hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected anything except punishment and consequences. Anderson explained. The 36th Division needed the knowledge. Official channels were too slow. Tommy's method could be taught in days instead of weeks. Could save lives immediately instead of waiting for proper equipment that might never arrive. I can't make this official, but I can assign you to a training detail. You teach the method. We document it as obstacle emplacement. Everyone benefits. Tommy had one condition. It gets named after Private Frank Riley. He died because I didn't break the rules fast enough. He deserves the credit more than I do. Anderson considered this, nodded slowly. The Riley method, I'll note that in the training documentation. June 1944, 2 weeks of training. Tommy taught 60 soldiers everything he knew, placement techniques, tension calculation, concealment methods, removal procedures. Every detail learned through trial and error and nearly getting killed that morning at the junction. The soldiers were skeptical at first. Wire wouldn't stop armored vehicles. Physics said it was impossible. Doctrine said it wouldn't work. Tommy showed them photographs of flipped scout cars, gave them the casualty statistics, explained the math using terms railroad switchmen understood. Cascade failures, system vulnerabilities. Simple physics applied correctly. By the end of the first week, they were believers. By the end of the second week, they were installing wires faster than Tommy could inspect them. The method spread. July 1944, 3 divisions were using variations. August, the entire Italian front. Never officially documented in field manuals. Never acknowledged in training materials. Just whispered knowledge passing from unit to unit. Soldier to soldier, the underground network that always existed beneath official hierarchies. Conservative estimates for March through August 1944. 43 German reconnaissance vehicles destroyed or disabled. Those vehicles would have called in hundreds of artillery strikes. Each strike averaged 5 to 8 casualties. Lives saved 300 to 400 American soldiers. Minimum estimate. Official documentation attributed the decline in reconnaissance casualties to improved defensive awareness and enhanced anti-tank capabilities. Tommy's name appeared in no reports. His innovation received no commendation. The Army preferred it that way. Admitting a corporal had solved a problem that stumped the engineering corps was bad for morale, bad for the illusion that officers knew best. Better to let it be quietly forgotten. November 15th, 1945. Fort Dix, New Jersey. Tommy was mustered out. Rank sergeant, combat infantryman badge, 2 Purple Hearts, honorable discharge certificate, train ticket home to Gary, Indiana. No medals for the Tripwires. No recognition beyond what fellow soldiers gave him, which was all he wanted anyway. January 1946. Gary looked exactly the same. The steel mills still ran 24 hours. The sky still glowed orange at night from blast furnaces. The same rust-colored dust still coated everything within 2 miles of the plants, like the war had never happened, like the world hadn't changed. But Tommy had changed in ways that couldn't be measured or explained to people who hadn't been there. U.S. Steel hired him back. Same position, switchman, same railroad yards where he'd learned about cascade failures and system vulnerabilities. The work was identical. The place was identical. But Tommy saw it differently now. He used his savings and a small loan to buy a garage on the east side of Gary. 2 bays, enough room for equipment and workspace. He painted the sign himself. Careful letters, taking his time to make it right. Sullivan and Riley Rail Services. Below it in smaller letters, in memory of Private Frank Riley, 34th Infantry Division. The shop specialized in coupling repairs, safety inspections, the work that actually mattered, that kept people primary instead of just keeping trains running on schedule. Every time Tommy fixed a coupling or replaced a worn pin, he thought of Frank's father, of Patrick Sullivan, of all the men who died because companies valued profits over safety. He never cut corners, never deferred maintenance, never told a customer something was safe when it wasn't. Cost him business sometimes, cost him money, but he slept better. 1947. Tommy married Dorothy from East Chicago. She worked at the diner on Main Street, had kind eyes, and never asked questions she sensed wouldn't be answered. Seemed to understand that some things couldn't be talked about, that some weights had to be carried silently. She asked once early in their marriage, "Where did you serve? What did you do?" "I was with the 34th Division in Italy, did my job, came home, just glad it's over." She never asked again. They bought a small house 6 blocks from the rail yards, had 3 children over the next decade, 2 boys and a girl. Good kids, smart. None of them went to war. Tommy made sure of that. He walked the same route to work for 30 years, carried the same lunch pail, did the same job, never talked about the war. The children knew their father had served. There was a photograph in uniform on the bedroom dresser. Young, serious, looking at the camera like he could see things nobody else could, but he deflected questions with humor or silence. War stories are for men who enjoyed the war. I just wanted to come home. He kept no souvenirs, No captured German equipment, no unit memorabilia, no scrapbook of letters or photographs, nothing that would make him remember more than he already did every single day. He joined the VFW post in Gary, attended maybe twice a year, usually for funerals. Other veterans wanted to remember, wanted to tell stories, wanted to make the war mean something larger than survival. Tommy wanted to forget, or at least to carry the memories quietly without making them public spectacle. But every March 12th, the phone would ring. Danny Foster calling from Arizona, where he'd opened a hardware store, or Williams from Detroit, or Jackson from Cleveland. Men who'd learned the method, who'd installed wires, who'd survived because they'd broken rules together. The conversations were short, same questions every year, same ritual of remembering without dwelling. You remember Chen Harrison Vargas every day. You still think about the wires. Sometimes. Mostly I think about Frank. Yeah, me too. They never talked long, just checking in, making sure they were both still alive, still managing the weight, still carrying what couldn't be put down. 1952. Tommy was working the Gary switchyard. Routine inspection. He noticed a coupling pin that looked worn, exactly like the one that had killed Patrick Sullivan 14 years earlier. He stopped the train, replaced the pin, prevented a derailment that would have killed 3 men and caused catastrophic damage. His supervisor asked him, "How'd you spot that? Looked fine to me." Tommy looked at the old pin in his hand, saw the stress fractures, the metal fatigue, the cascade failure waiting to happen. Learn to see problems before they become disasters. Italy taught me what happens when you ignore small things until they kill people. Walking away, he thought of Frank. This is the shop, Frank. Not the building, not the sunning. This work, keeping people alive. That's Sullivan and Riley Rail Services. June 1963, a writer from American Rifleman magazine called. Someone had mentioned Tommy's name in connection with the Tripwire innovation. The writer wanted to interview him for an article about improvised field modifications during World War II. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening. Tommy was in the garage working on a neighbor's hunting rifle. Dorothy called him inside. "Mr. Sullivan, my name is David Patterson. I'm writing an article about improvised modifications soldiers made during the war. Your name came up regarding a range reference system. I'm sorry, a tripwire system using barbed wire. I'd love to interview you for..." "Not interested." "Sir, from what I understand, your innovation saved hundreds of lives, changed how infantry dealt with reconnaissance vehicles. This is an important story that deserves to be..." I said not interested. "Thank you for calling." Tommy hung up. Patterson called back 3 times over the next 2 weeks. Tommy never answered. Dorothy started screening calls. Eventually, Patterson stopped trying. Dorothy asked him about it one evening while they were washing dishes. "Why won't you talk to them if you did something important?" Tommy was quiet for a long time, hands in soapy water, staring out the window at the rail yards where his father had worked himself to death. Frank Riley did something important. He followed orders and died. Bobby Sullivan did something important. He died following doctrine. I broke rules and lived. That's not a story anyone needs to hear. She didn't understand, but she let it go. 1978. Tommy retired from U.S. Steel. 32 years of service. A pension that would cover expenses if they were careful. A handshake from a supervisor who didn't know his name. A gold watch that stopped working after 6 months. He worked the Sullivan and Riley shop full-time now, fixing hunting rifles for neighbors. Safety inspections for small companies. Quiet work. Peaceful work. Nobody died if he made a mistake. March 11th, 1987, 7 o'clock in the evening. The phone rang. Tommy knew who it was before Dorothy answered. Same call, same date, every year for 43 years. Danny Foster, 73 years old now. Voice rougher than it used to be, but still strong. 43 years, Tommy, every March 12th. You remember Frank Riley, every day. You remember what he said. No more waiting for permission. No more following orders that kill your brothers. Long pause. Both men quiet, carrying weight across telephone lines. Danny's voice was softer now. You still have the dreams. Sometimes, the scout cars, the wire, the German kid we pulled from the wreck. He was maybe 22, just doing his job. We did good work, Tommy. We did Frank's work. He's the one who gave me the courage, died telling me to stop being afraid of breaking rules. In 400 men came home because of what you started, because of what Frank started. I just finished it. Silence stretched, comfortable, the kind that exists between men who've shared things that can't be explained to anyone else. Sleep well, brother. You too, Danny. March 12th, 1987, 3:47 in the afternoon. Tommy was in his living room working on a neighbor's rifle. Just routine cleaning and adjustment. Nothing complicated. The heart attack was massive, sudden, no warning. One moment he was working, the next crushing pressure in his chest radiating down his left arm. The classic symptoms, the unmistakable feeling of a heart giving out after 73 years. He tried to call for Dorothy, couldn't get enough air. The world went gray at the edges, narrowing, fading. She heard him gasp, ran in from the kitchen, saw his face, knew immediately. She called for an ambulance, held his hand, told him to hold on. Help was coming, just hold on. Tommy gripped her hand, tried to speak, needed to say something. Tell Frank, tell him I kept the promise. Tell him the shop has his name. Tell him it worked. Tell him I'm sorry it took his death to give me courage. Who's Frank, Tommy? Who are you talking about? But his eyes were already unfocused, breath slowing, the particular stillness that meant time running out. Paramedics arrived 8 minutes later. Too late, they tried anyway. Professional obligation, went through the motions knowing it was finished. Pronounced dead at 4:03 in the afternoon. March 12th, 1987. Exactly 43 years to the day after the first scout car flipped at 6:47 in the morning outside Casino, Italy. Dorothy never knew about Frank Riley, never knew about the tripwires, never knew her husband had changed warfare and saved 400 lives and refused credit because the men who deserved recognition were dead. The obituary in the Gary Post-Tribune was 4 paragraphs. Thomas Sullivan, 63, of Gary, died March 12th. Veteran of World War II, 34th Infantry Division, Italy campaign. Worked 32 years U.S. Steel as switchman. Operated Sullivan and Riley Rail Services, 1978 to 1987. Survived by a wife, Dorothy, of 40 years, 3 children, 6 grandchildren. Services Friday, Calumet Park Cemetery. No mention of tripwires. No mention of scout cars. No mention of 400 lives saved. No mention of the Riley method that was still being taught unofficially in armies around the world. The funeral drew 70 people, Dorothy and children and grandchildren, neighbors, VFW members, customers whose rifles Tommy had fixed, people who'd known him as the quiet guy who did good work and never asked for recognition. But also Danny Foster, 73, flew in from Arizona, stood in the back, didn't approach the family, just came to pay respects. Williams drove from Detroit. Jackson took a train from Cleveland. 8 other men, all former soldiers, all old now. Gray hair, weathered faces, bodies showing 70 years of use, all alive because Tommy Sullivan had taught them the method. After the service, Danny approached Dorothy. Ma'am, your husband saved my life. Saved a lot of lives. Just wanted you to know. Dorothy looked confused. He never talked about it. He wouldn't have. That was Tommy. Did the work, came home. Never asked for credit, but we knew. We all knew what he did. The tripwire method never became official doctrine. The Army didn't adopt it formally. No training manual included it. No field manual mentioned it. But it persisted. Korea saw soldiers using variations, different materials, same principle. Vietnam had similar modifications. A Marine in Hugh City, 1968, used coat hanger wire. Made shots. Wrong story. Used wire across roads. Stopped enemy reconnaissance. Never knew the method came from a railroad switchman in Gary, Indiana. An Army unit in Afghanistan, 2004, created a version using scrap metal from destroyed vehicles. Positioned it across roads used by insurgent scouts. Worked perfectly. Never knew they were using a system invented 60 years earlier by a man who'd promised a dying friend to stop following rules that killed people. Modern military forces teach obstacle emplacement as standard doctrine now. The physics are the same. The principle identical. Wire at axle height to disable light vehicles. It's in the manuals now. Official. Approved. No mention of Tommy Sullivan. No mention of Frank Riley. No mention of the 60 soldiers who learned it and spread it and saved 400 lives. The method lives. The name's forgotten. 2024. Helmand Province, Afghanistan. A young Marine engineer strings wire across a road. Different war, different enemy, same cascade principle. She doesn't know the method's name. Doesn't know it came from a railroad switchman who learned to see system failures in Gary, Indiana rail yards. Just knows it works. The wire hums in desert wind. Same physics, same mathematics, same understanding that one failure cascades into many if you don't stop it early. At Calumet Park Cemetery, Merrillville, Indiana, a weathered headstone reads Thomas Sullivan, 1924 to 1987, SGT, U.S. Army, World War II. No mention of wire, no mention of 43 vehicles, no mention of 400 lives. But the method still works, still saves lives, still teaches that sometimes the best solutions come from people who aren't supposed to have them. From railroad switchmen who understand cascade failures better than engineers who write manuals. From corporals who watch friends die and decide regulations matter less than results. Tommy Sullivan's grandson James is 32 now, mechanical engineer in Chicago. Knows his grandfather served in World War II. Knows he worked the steel mills and ran a small shop. Found an old photograph once while cleaning out Dorothy's house after she passed in 2003. Grandfather in uniform, young, serious, intense eyes looking at something the camera couldn't capture. James keeps it on his desk at work. Never knew the story behind it. Never knew his grandfather changed warfare. Never knew about Frank Riley or the Promise or the 400 men who came home because a 20-year-old decided doing the right thing mattered more than following orders. Sometimes the greatest innovations come from unexpected places, from people who aren't supposed to solve problems that stump experts, from ordinary men who do extraordinary things and then go home quietly like nothing happened. Sometimes the system would rather forget than admit it was wrong, would rather erase names than acknowledge that regulations written by officers got people killed and solutions invented by corporals saved lives. Sometimes the heroes are the ones who refuse recognition, who understand that glory is empty and medals collect dust, and the only legacy that matters is the work itself. Tommy Sullivan broke rules because rules were killing people, created something new because old methods weren't working, saved 400 lives because that was more important than following doctrine or protecting his career or waiting for permission from people who'd never held a dying friend. When offered recognition, he refused, because the method mattered more than his name, because Frank Riley deserved credit more than he did, because going home and living a quiet life and keeping a promise to a dead friend was worth more than any medal. That's the real American story. Not the generals who take credit, not the politicians who write histories, not the men who demand recognition for doing what needed doing, the corporals who see problems and fix them, the railroad switchmen who understand systems through experience rather than education, the ordinary men who do extraordinary things and then go home and open shops named after dead friends and never ask for anything except to be left alone with their memories. The wire still works. The method still saves lives. The lesson still teaches. Even if most people never know the name of the man who started it all, even if his grandson keeps a photograph on his desk and doesn't know it shows the man who proved that sometimes breaking rules is the most honorable thing a soldier can do. Even if the only memorial is a weathered headstone and a shop sign that nobody understands, and annual phone calls that stopped when the last men who remembered finally died. The work matters. The credit doesn't. Frank Riley would have understood that. Tommy Sullivan knew it. And 400 men who came home from Italy, instead of dying there, lived lives and raised families and built futures because two friends from Gary, Indiana understood that sometimes the system needs to be ignored to save the people it's supposed to protect. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything that matters.